We are here with Chad Cannon.
Visitor. Have a visitor pass.
He's our very good friend and amazing composer that we both look up to. I personally first met Chad in Slovenia in 2017 in December, where he wrote a piece for Mate Bekauc, a Slovenian clarinetist.
An incredible clarinetist.
Incredible.
Not just clarinet, many woodwinds.
And Chad wrote this amazing piece of music that I went to both concerts to listen to, the Thursday and the Friday concert. And you had the full choir, full orchestra, and Mate was playing clarinet, duduk, singing bowls.
Bass clarinet.
And the orchestra loved playing it, but they were a bit mad at you because you made the piece too long.
Well, it was complicated because Mate gave me free rein, and then, yeah, he was like, it's fine if it's an hour. And then the orchestra didn't like that, but in the end,
You wrote a piece that was 1 hour long?
Yeah, it was like a 10-movement symphony.
Oh my god.
But the thing is that usually these, it was christened, right? Like it was the first premiere performance.
The first, yeah.
Usually those pieces, at least in the Slovenian Philharmonics, they're shorter, like up to 25 minutes. So after Chad's piece, there was still like a symphony of like a Dvorak or something.
I think
the concert
wow.
was like 3 hours and a half long or something.
No, I don't think it was quite that. They did the first half of the program was other pieces, and mine was at the end.
Oh, then they switched.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I
They did some Gershwin or something, and then it was like American music.
yeah, but it was really good. I know that I went twice, and the only other time that I went twice, which also kind of connects to you, I think, is for John Corigliano's clarinet concerto that also Mate Bekauc performed. Like that was 12 years ago.
And Corigliano's music is so rich and.
Wasn't
wonderful.
Corigliano your?
He wasn't my teacher, but he was on faculty and he was on juries whenever we would have our juries every quarter. So I got to know him a little bit.
Did he like your music?
Hard to know. I mean, he was very nice and generous always. So if he didn't, he hit it well.
Let's talk about how you went from Juilliard to scoring shows.
Yeah, so my first job here in LA was working for Conrad Pope. He's probably a lot of people have heard of him, but he's a wonderful orchestrator and composer, but he's primarily known as an orchestrator and conductor. And he roped me in on Howard Shore's Hobbit Trilogy score. So that was my very first score. Lots of notes. It's like your dinosaur score here.
You were there as
Thousands
an
of pages.
orchestrator.
Yeah, assistant orchestrator to Conrad. So I was working a lot in Finale and Sibelius, and a lot of hours late at night.
Can you talk about maybe how that process went? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well,
personally.
it was complicated because the orchestra was in New Zealand. And Peter Jackson was there, and Conrad was there conducting. And then our orchestration team was here in LA. And then Howard's in New York. And we also recorded choir in London, so it was like all over the world. So Howard would, have his team approve cues and then send them to Conrad's team, us, to orchestrate. And then once we're done, Conrad would conduct it with the orchestra. So.
That's so cool. How much of the orchestration was it? Was it mostly taking down the MIDI and cleaning it up, or was it
Howard
a lot
provided pretty rich orchestrations to begin with. I think the main thing for us was like fleshing out, like aleatoric elements and just making things more rich so that they would be able to save time on stage. Because I know on earlier of the Peter Jackson projects with Howard, he would do a lot of like free, like from the podium, experimenting with the orchestra, and that gets really expensive
Right.
when you have the orchestra sitting there. So basically planning those experimental sections was like one of the main big things we were doing, but also just Conrad is, you know, one of the world's best, so he was also adding a lot of detail in woodwinds and strings, etc. So
Yeah, he's absolutely incredible.
yeah, so that was my immersion into film music, was really under Conrad. And then in 2016 I did the Sundance Composer Labs, which sadly during COVID got discontinued. But it's really the Composer Labs that sort of started me as my, like, I got my composer career started through the labs. And then since then I haven't really done much orchestrating except for Ghost of Tsushima, which was the Sony PlayStation game, and then for Joe Hisaishi, the Studio Ghibli composer.
Love him.
Yeah, so he's really the only one I still do arranging and orchestrating for in film music.
How did you get connected with him?
I studied at Harvard, and Harvard has a strong Japanese, like, center for Japanese studies.
Weren't you Juilliard?
Juilliard was my master's, so this was my undergrad. Anyway, so because of the Harvard Center for Japanese Studies, I was able to go back a lot. For all my summers as an undergrad I spent in Japan. And one of my classmates in my Japanese class at Harvard was this guy Ryu Goto, who's a really fabulous violinist. His older sister is Midori. She's like a famous Grammy-winning, concert touring violinist. And she hired me, so this is a long story, sorry. She hired me to work on her charity music projects in Japan and in Southeast Asia. So I went on 8 trips with her where I was planning these concerts for her to go to hospitals, refugee camps, schools, etc. And this finally connects back to Joe Hisaishi, because he had written a theme song for her charity project, which Midori asked me to orchestrate and arrange, and we recorded it, and then Hisaishi heard it and he liked it, so he started asking me to do other big live film music concert arranging for him. So that was the connection.
That's really
very long-winded way of saying
No, that's really
Awesome.
cool. It really shows in your music. We were just listening to American Factory on our way again. And it really shows in your music how well versed you are in orchestration in general, and how you use, at least personally, I always judge orchestration based on how well the woodwinds are utilized. Because that's kind of like the icing on the cake, I think. Like you start with the strings, then it's brass, and then the woodwinds are the part of the orchestra that I believe people tend to least understand and utilize. So that's one aspect of, like, I think your music that really shines. But in, like, American Factory, what struck out to me is how well you were able to combine the Eastern Asian influence, the Chinese part, with the American part. It's like this really cool synergy where you can hear both, but it's neither. So
that's a nice compliment. Thank you.
What is, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Is it like, you tell us what.
I mean, I think
what you did.
Well, first of all, I have to acknowledge that China is different from Japan, and those are very, historically connected cultures, but also very distinctive. And for American Factory, it is it's an American story, but about a Chinese businessman who comes to America, right?
It's an awesome documentary, and you should watch it.
And the filmmakers are the ones who specifically requested woodwinds. It's interesting, the director, Julia Reichert, she's passed away this year. She had cancer, but she's an iconic documentary filmmaker. I was going to say documentarian, but she left us this year, but she left many, many amazing films. I recommend you watch, go Google her, resume of films and watch them. They're all really interesting and very American, deeply American stories. And she had gone to this concert and heard this Mozart serenade that it's like very woodwind heavy with like a French horn and like a bass, and that the orchestration was really interesting, and she latched onto that. And when she hired me, and when they were searching for composers, they were asking each of the composers, do you write for woodwinds, because we're really interested in that, which wouldn't have been my first instinct for like a factory film. But it turned out like the sound environment in that film, which is so industrial and there's a ton of machinery going all the time. You're in the factory a lot, and there's glass shattering and stuff. It actually worked really well because the woodwinds kind of cut through all that. Somehow the texture of the woods lent itself really well to the soundscape of that film. So the woodwinds, I can't really take credit for, even though I wrote them. Like, that was her idea, to use woodwinds in the film. But I think you're right that woodwinds are tricky to write for, and I'm not a woodwind player, so I definitely would not have been able to write that well for woodwinds had I not, learned from Conrad. And Joe Hisaishi also writes a lot of woodwind stuff, so just being immersed in their music was really, really an education in how to use woodwinds. But as far as the question about like fusing Chinese sound and American sound,
I mean, I'm no American music scholar because I'm not American, but I might have heard like some Copeland harmony progressions.
Definitely.
Is that correct?
And that was intentional for sure. My dog is named Copeland.
Oh.
Copeland's one of my favorites, and I love that he's defined as like the iconic American composer, even though he's like the gay communist Jewish son of Russian immigrants, like
Oh, I didn't even
yeah, he was like
any concert in Slovenia ever that's like American music, it's always Gershwin and Copeland.
Exactly.
Gershwin and
Well,
Copeland.
and the concert that I was at in Slovenia was that too. I don't know if they had Copeland, but anyway, it was.
Well, hopefully next time when there's a concert in Slovenia, American music, it's Kara Talve and Chad Cannon.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, 3 people will show up.
Oh no, it will be a full hall.
The whole country.
Okay, can you talk a bit about the 2 documentaries that you recently scored?
Yeah,
And they're vastly different subjects. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so we're talking now about the
Algiers
series,
and the
right?
murders.
Mind Over
Mind
Murder.
Over.
Yeah, so these are both TV series. One's for HBO, Mind Over Murder, which is about a murder and rape case that took place in the 80s in Nebraska. 6 people went to prison for it, and then 20 years later they found out it was a 7th person, and none of the 6 were even there. So very dark, psychological, because it's about the faultiness of human memory, because some of the 6 that went to prison thought they were there when this murder happened, but it turns out that your memory is not, it's malleable. That's one of the main points of the documentary series. So the score for that is there is a lot of like banjo and kind of plucky stuff, and a lot of up close, gritty, dark strings. I'm a string player, so I did record a lot of the strings in that score. And then Algiers is a story about a high school football team in New Orleans that is trying to win their 5th state championship in a row, which is really remarkable for a mostly black public high school. Because usually the really strong football programs in the South are at like the private, mostly white schools. So it's remarkable what this coach in New Orleans has been able to do. But for the score for that, it's like very soulful, and there are some cues that are dark strings, like medieval almost. But you
used singers and performers from New Orleans, right?
That's right. And I had some. There was a cast of people from that part of New Orleans that had a connection to the high school that all jumped on, and like the assistant coach on the team has a really beautiful, soulful voice, so we actually recorded him, and he introduced us to a gospel choir that we recorded as well for episode 5, when there's one of the kids dies in a shooting, and there's a funeral scene for him, so that scene's like really emotional, and the choir and Shaq, that's his name, Shaquille, kind of take the lead. They take center stage for those moments. Yeah, I think scoring for docs is a subject that I think is interesting to talk about. Maybe we can talk to you about how scoring Prehistoric Planet was maybe different from some of your other projects, or was it? Because it's also big and romantic and lush score.
Take it
Also,
away.
big budget for recording, which is unusual for docs because most of the doc scores that I do, I'm working with very limited production budget, so I'm having to create a lot of material myself. So.
Well, I know that for Prehistoric Planet, last year for the Emmys, I believe, they had a hard time putting it into a category because it's watched as a documentary. It's based on current science, current knowledge of what the best science we currently have of what dinosaurs were and how they acted and how they lived their lives. On the other hand, it's CGI dinosaurs with shot in all the landscapes are actually Earth.
Sure.
But it is scripted.
Right.
So it's a weird combination of
genre.
Yeah. I maybe it's even the first of its kind like this. So, but we approach it as scoring a natural history documentary. Do you want to talk about it?
No. I think that covers it.
Yeah.
Is there any, what were some of the key assignments you were given, as you're starting to develop your material? And were you working directly to picture, locked renderings, or were you seeing pretty rough?
Yeah, it was
cuts
pretty
early?
rough animation, unrendered, sometimes just a cardboard paper cut out of a dinosaur with people holding it up as a kind of a gauge of where the dinosaur will be when it is rendered.
Interesting.
And they even had, people on motorcycles driving down the hill acting as if, to interpret how fast the dinosaur
Yes,
would be
with the helicopter
running.
shot.
Yeah,
My favorite one was still in season 1 of Ice Worlds. There were, I think the first cut we got, there were no dinosaurs yet, and there were just arrows, red arrows. And then the next cut we got, there was 20 dinosaurs, but 15 of them had a red X over their heads, meaning they died, they killed them. And
it's like a video game or something.
yeah, we had to. Well, that's why the spotting sessions were so important for us to actually get a gauge of what's gonna go on.
And now on this show, you also had the main theme by Hans and
Andrew,
yeah. So you're incorporating that, I assume, throughout a lot of your cues as well, is that?
Yeah, whenever we felt like the theme should be featured, we definitely used it in those spots. We also had some themes for specific episodes, the forests episode had kind of out of nowhere, we had a theme for it. Or did he ask for a theme?
No, I think the producer asked for the theme for that.
Really? Or was it Badlands?
No.
Okay, yeah. Matthew Wright. Yeah, he did ask for his episode to have a specific theme. So, and he really liked the traditional sound.
This was in addition to the main.
Yeah, so the forests episode had its own motif that sort of carried over from the sauropods in the forest episode. Whenever we see them again, then we were using the forests theme. And the Badlands episode of season 2 had its own theme as well, because that was such an iconic landscape that we felt like this one needs its own thematic thing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think also the producers of that episode, Dom Walter and was it Simon?
Yeah.
They were worried that the episode was not connected enough, I believe, in their first cuts. So then I think Kara on the spotting call suggested, why don't we have a theme that carries throughout? And it works. I really like the theme that Kara wrote. It's so cool.
I've really enjoyed listening to the soundtrack and hearing I think you guys have done such a good job of like capturing sort of the classic Han sound, but really having your own spin on that, and like the harmonies you're using and stuff. I can definitely hear like different flavors that you wouldn't normally hear in a Han score. So,
well, it's like more than a Han sound. I mean, obviously, we worked on the score together, so it's obviously going to have a Han sound. Yeah, so we were dealing with two dichotomous things. On one hand, it's a natural history. It's portraying itself as a natural history show, like you were watching Planet Earth. So we needed the score to feel. We needed the audience to feel at home while listening to the score. So we help with the illusion that they're actually watching real animals on screen. So for that, the big help was the BBC Symphony National Orchestra of Wales that we recorded, because everyone's familiar with the orchestral sound, so that brings the audience home. And then on the other hand, we created an array of custom instruments out of materials of which paleontologists study dinosaurs from, so fossils, rocks, bones, fossil replicas. And these instruments brought the otherworldly, bit alien and archaic, if that's a word, sound to the score. So that's the extra touches that you
which is super
hear.
effective. It's so cool to hear that all come together. And as I'm someone who loves history, and I also love natural history, but like trying to bring to life something that's been gone for so long is always such an interesting task.
Yeah.
I recently scored a documentary about Edward Muybridge, who was like basically the first person to project moving images. So he developed high-speed shutters that were able to show that a horse, when it runs, all four hooves leave the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, he shows up in Nope, that film.
Yeah. That's how I
yeah,
know
so
him.
it's that guy. But like the challenge in that film was like, how do we bring this guy's material? We do have his photographs, but like there's nobody alive who knew this guy, and so how do we animate and bring him to life, and doing it in the music and in the dialogue and in the editing of the show. Just an interesting challenge to bring something to life that's been dead so long. So
yeah, totally.
I thought you guys were really creative and did a really effective job of doing that for the dinosaurs, which
they've been dead for a long time.
Yeah.
Whenever I would throw, as a kid, when I would throw a coin into a wishing well, I always wished for dinosaurs to come back alive. And I was doing that for years. And then at some point, I realized just that the wishing well doesn't work.
Did we just hit one of your
yeah,
cues?
it's Scariscue's playing. But that's how I became how I became skeptical. I was like, why doesn't it work? It's a wishing well. And they kept telling me, well, you have to be careful what you wish for. Like, you can't just wish for dinosaurs to come back alive.
If they did come back, we would have a lot of problems.
I know, but so like if it's a wishing
really
well,
wishing for.
If it's a wishing well, then like it should work for everything. Like, is it selective on what kind of wishes it?
I've often said when I die, and I can travel, if I could time travel, it would definitely be to go visit Earth. You know.
Yeah.
Tens or hundreds of millions of years ago.
Let's end on that thought. You would go how long back?
Let's say 66 million, which
that's good. I would probably have to go.
But
I'm gonna say I would go ancient.
Babylon.
No, not ancient Babylon. Having a mind fart right here. The civilization that was in what's currently Iraq and Syria, the first.
The Assyrian or the.
Yeah, but let's just say I would go like the first kingdom of ancient Egypt.
Got it.
Carol?
I don't know. Maybe like 1945.
Yeah, you're traveling there now with your. Well, can we even talk about that? No. Can't talk about that.
You would go to 1945?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I like the music of the time.
And the war ends in
Oh, the war
1945.
And the war is over.
Okay.
That's why I said 1945.
You specify like September.
Yes, thank you.
Definitely
Yeah, not the
not
early
August.
1940s.
You don't want to be. Don't be in Japan in August that year.
1945.
I don't want to go see smelly dinosaurs.
It's true. They probably really did read. So, but just to clarify, your score, like the question about the genre. So it is submitted for Emmys in the nonfiction category, right?
No, it's in-
Unclear.
What-
Because
I mean,
I
it's
found
submitted. It's being voted.
I
on,
went
right?
on Variety and it
Yeah.
like it's under the prediction it's like next stop contenders.
Sure,
it used
sure.
to be under documentary and now it's under something else.
Prehistoric Planet?
Mm-hmm. At
For
least
what?
at least the
Music?
show. No, not the
Oh.
music. I think the music
Oh,
is under
interesting.
documentary.
Yeah, the music's under documentary.
That was my question: is if your score is actually
I think
Yes,
so.
we're up
Been
for
submitted.
consideration in the.
not
Please
just-
vote
Outstanding
all for
score.
us.
Okay, well, they don't know the category.
I think we don't need to put this in.
Yeah.
I think we do our goodbyes.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for
Awesome.
coming.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for writing good music.
Likewise.
for the world.